24 hours after the onset of instability on Mayon's southern flank, the geological hazard maps of the Philippines are being redrawn in a state of shock. 5,440 residents, 14 evacuation centers, and 52 villages have effectively vanished under a fresh blanket of ash. Across the Bicol region, all flights have been grounded. Visibility on the critical transit arteries of southern Luzon has dropped to absolute zero. But this is not the conventional explosion you are used to seeing in cinema. This is a systemic shedding. A line on the map, what we call the Permanent Danger Zone, PDZ, originally drawn to protect the public, has been officially breached by pyroclastic density currents reaching temperatures of 700 degrees Celsius. How can a peak that did not explode generate a destructive force greater than a direct eruption? And why, while the world remains fixated on the crater, is the true threat actually hidden within the approaching rain clouds? We are about to decode the anatomy of chaos. Welcome to this strategic debrief from PlasmaPulse. Please leave your location in the comments below. We are beginning our global network roll call right now. To understand how a system fails, we must look at the exact moment the physics changed. For 116 days, Mayon was a study in slow, agonizing effusion. 3 rivers of lava were creeping down its flanks simultaneously. The Basud Gully to the east stretched to 3.8 kilometers, the Bonga to the southeast at 3.2 kilometers. But it was the youngest flow, the Miisi to the south, that reached its breaking point first, 17:38 p.m. The front of the Miisi lava flow abruptly stops advancing. To an untrained observer, this might look like a slowdown. To a geophysicist, this is the signature of structural fatigue, 17:39 p.m. 1 minute later, the mountain can no longer support its own weight. The cooled, hardened crust at the front of the flow, which had acted as a natural dam, shatters under the relentless pressure of fresh lava arriving from the crater above. This wasn't a volcanic explosion. It was a structural collapse. The mountain didn't blow up. It shed its skin. By midnight, the sensors at the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology had logged 14 distinct pulses of these pyroclastic density currents. These are not clouds of ash. They are gravity-driven avalanches of superheated rock fragments traveling at temperatures of roughly 700 degrees Celsius. At this heat, the internal energy is so high that the flow moves like a liquid, ignoring obstacles and incinerating the very air it displaces. By dawn, the physical toll of these 14 collapses became visible on the seismic record. 284 rockfalls were logged in a single observation window. More troubling were the 32 volcanic earthquakes, 25 of which were tremor events lasting between 2 and 15 minutes each. These tremors are the mountain's heartbeat, and that heart is racing. The agency issued its bulletin shortly after. Alert Level 3, no de-escalation. Status, unresolved. The insight. In the world of investigative meteorology, we look for patterns. 14 collapses in 24 hours is not a random occurrence. It is a failure mode. The conditions that produced the first collapse yesterday are exactly the same conditions present today. The lava is still feeding, the front is still loading, but as the geology fails above, a new threat is gathering in the atmosphere. Because while 700-degree fire is descending the mountain, a different kind of flood is preparing to rise from below. To see the full scale of the coming crisis, we have to look at the one factor no one is reporting, the 117-day saturation point. In the popular imagination, a volcano is a pressurized vessel, a soda bottle waiting to pop. We look for the vertical column of ash, the phreatic explosion, where superheated water flashes to steam and tears the cone open. But what occurred at Mayon's Miisi Gully was something far more insidious. It wasn't a release of pressure. It was a failure of engineering. Maria Antonia Bornas, the chief of volcano monitoring at Fichevolks, described it with clinical precision. The newest lava flow didn't grow or advance. It simply began to disgorge. Think of the mountain not as a bomb, but as a structure that has exceeded its load-bearing capacity. For 117 days, the crater has been feeding these rivers of fire. As the lava travels, the outer shell cools and hardens, forming a brittle toe at the front. When new molten material continues to arrive from the summit, it creates a hydraulic force that the brittle front can no longer contain. At 1739 yesterday, that structural dam finally gave way. When this collapse happens, it doesn't just create a rockfall. It generates what experts call a pyroclastic density current, PDC. Because the internal core of that lava flow was still liquid and gas-rich, the moment it shattered, it released a chaotic, gravity-driven avalanche. Standard internal temperatures for these currents at Mayon are measured at approximately 700 degrees Celsius. At this intensity, the rocks don't just tumble, they fluidize. They move with a terrifying fluidity that allows them to hug the contours of the gullies, traveling much further and much faster than the slow-moving lava that birthed them. This is the fundamental truth that almost no foreign media is reporting. Mount Mayon is not waiting for a signal to explode. It is shedding weight downhill. It is losing its physical integrity. By shifting from an effusive state to a collapsed state, the volcano has entered a phase where the danger is no longer confined to the crater. The danger is now a product of the slope itself. The mountain has become a massive, unstable pile of superheated debris, held together by nothing more than friction and luck. And that makes the situation far more unpredictable than a standard eruption. If the mountain is losing its structure, then the safety lines we've drawn on our maps are no longer based on current reality. In fact, as we are about to see, the 14 collapses of the last 24 hours didn't just stay within the boundaries. They officially breached the one zone where no human was ever supposed to be. To understand why 5,440 people are now in a race against time, we have to look at the permanent danger zone and why it just failed. In the world of emergency management, we are trained to handle events. An earthquake happens, a storm passes, a bomb explodes. There is a beginning, a peak, and a recovery. But what we are witnessing at Mayon is no longer an event. It has become a frequency. 14 collapses in 24 hours. If you do the math, that is a pyroclastic density current surging down the mountain every 100 minutes. This isn't a singular crisis. It is a rhythmic, mechanical failure of a geological system. When a volcano collapses once, it can be seen as a release of local tension. But when it collapses 14 times in a single observation window, it reveals a pattern. It tells us that the internal loading from the crater is perfectly synced with the failing of the slope. The mountain has found a terrifying equilibrium. It is receiving fresh lava at the exact rate it is shedding its old skin. In investigative meteorology, we call this a feed loop. The very thing that should be stabilizing the mountain, the cessation of an explosion, is actually what is fueling these repeated silent surges of fire. This is the shift in perspective that viewers need to grasp. We are not watching an eruption that is getting bigger. We are watching a repetition that is getting more efficient. Every time a pulse of 700-degree debris clears a path through the gully, it smooths the way for the next one. It removes the natural obstacles, the trees, the boulders, the cooling lava, creating a frictionless highway for the pulses to follow. The mountain isn't just losing its structure, it is optimizing its own destruction. This repetition is already breaking the rules we rely on for survival. In a standard eruption, we look for a climax, followed by a decline. But how do you issue a warning for a mountain that refuses to peak? And more importantly, when the pulses become this frequent, the invisible boundaries we've drawn for safety start to dissolve. We've been told for decades that 6 kilometers is the permanent danger zone, the line between life and death. But yesterday, reality ignored that line. And for the 5,440 people living on the edge, that map just became a piece of fiction. In every crisis, we look for a boundary, a line in the sand, that tells us where the danger ends and safety begins. At Mayon, that line is the 6-kilometer permanent danger zone. It is a mathematical circle drawn by PGIVA and enforced by the provincial government. It is meant to be the absolute threshold of human survival. But geography is not a static map. It is a living process. According to the official May 3rd bulletin, the pyroclastic density currents generated within the Ami-Isi Gully yesterday didn't just approach the line, they breached it. For a terrifying moment yesterday afternoon, the map was ignored. 700-degree debris crossed that surface, proving that the mountain does not respect municipal ordinances. To understand why this matters, you have to look at the false sense of safety that existed just days before. As late as last week, residents were entering this very zone with municipal-issued day passes. They went in to feed pigs and chickens that represent months, sometimes years, of household income. The system allowed them in because, for 116 days, the mountain seemed contained. But the 14 collapses of the last 24 hours have rendered those passes obsolete. The mountain is no longer waiting for an order to evacuate. It is making retroactive evacuations. It is claiming territory that humans thought they had negotiated for. This is the invisible disaster within the disaster. When a permanent danger zone is breached, the entire infrastructure of trust collapses. If 6 kilometers is no longer enough, is 7? Is 10? But the threat isn't just growing longer. It is moving. While the world's cameras are fixed on the Ami-Isi Gully to the south, the mountain is performing a strategic rotation. The danger is shifting, and what is gathering beneath the surface is preparing to turn this geological crisis into a multi-systemic catastrophe. To see the next phase of this collapse, we have to look at the 3 rivers of fire and the one that just became the new front line. To watch a volcano for 117 days is to watch a living organism adapt. It does not attack from just one direction. As we stand here today, there are not 1, but 3 distinct rivers of lava moving down the mountain simultaneously. For nearly 4 months, the world's eyes were fixed on the east face. The Basud Gully was the primary engine of the eruption, stretching 3.8 kilometers toward the sea. It was the longest, the most visible, and by all accounts, the most dangerous. But yesterday, the mountain performed a strategic rotation. On day 117, the threat didn't just grow, it pivoted. While the Basud flow on the east remained stalled, the Ami-Isi Gully on the south, the shortest of the 3 at only 1.6 kilometers, became the site of the 14 collapses we've been analyzing. This is what we call a tactical shift. By moving the point of failure from the east to the south, Mayon has effectively bypassed the defensive focus of the past 116 days. It is as if the mountain is probing the perimeter, looking for the weakest structural point to shed its immense weight. Most people view a volcano as a stationary object. In reality, it is a rotating threat. By distributing its mass into 3 different gullies, Basud, Bonga, and Ami-Isi, the mountain is loading multiple triggers at once. When one flow stops advancing, like Ami-Isi did at 5:38 p.m. yesterday, it doesn't mean the danger is over. It means that specific sector has reached its saturation point. It means the weight is ready to drop. The mountain isn't just erupting, it is repositioning its artillery. But as the mountain rotates its geological threat, the environment around it is preparing a counterattack. The 14 collapses in the south have left behind a massive, unstable blanket of loose material sitting on a 35-degree slope. And according to the latest atmospheric data, the one element that can turn this loose rock into a high-speed liquid is currently gathering just offshore. The eruption above is no longer the only threat. What is forming below it, on the very slopes where the ash has sat for 117 days, might be even worse. To understand the next phase of this compounding disaster, we have to look at the invisible trigger that no one outside the Baikal region is reporting. For 117 days, Mount Mayon has been loading a weapon. Every rockfall, every pulse of ash, and every one of the 14 collapses we've analyzed has contributed to a massive accumulation of loose volcanic debris. 52 villages, once vibrant and green, are now buried under a fresh, heavy gray blanket. But ash alone is a static threat. To turn this mountain into a killing machine, you only need one more ingredient: water. Benison Estareja and the weather specialists at Pagasa have issued a warning that should chill anyone within 20 kilometers of the summit. Afternoon and evening rains are forecast across the Bicol region for the next several days. On a standard mountain, this would be a simple storm. On a volcano flank that has been ash-saturated for 117 consecutive days, it is the birth of a Lahar. A Lahar is not just a mudslide. It is a volcanic slurry with the density of wet concrete, capable of carrying boulders the size of cars. It moves at speeds that humans simply cannot outrun. The drainage channels that empty Mayon, the Kawaburabud, the Buang, the Maninila, the Anoling, and the Trevisia, are now positioned to capture every drop of that forecast rain. The moment a sufficient rain band crosses the province, the 117 days of loading will turn into a release that the world isn't ready for. This is the part that no one outside the Bicol region is reporting. The eruption above is no longer the primary threat. The slope below it is. We are witnessing a cascading disaster. If the geology fails, the PDCs incinerate the land. If the atmosphere fails, the Lahars bury it. We have moved from a volcanic event into a systemic crisis, where the mountain and the sky are working in tandem. The eruption isn't the disaster, it's the trigger. And while the scientists track the rain and the sensors monitor the vibration, thousands of families are caught in the middle. They are trapped between a mountain that is shedding its skin and a sky that is about to wash that skin directly into their living rooms. To understand the human cost of this invisible disaster, we have to look past the data and into the schoolyards where the tents are already being unfolded. Because for the 8,000 households in the path of the Lahar, the baseline has just been reached. Statistics can be a form of anesthesia. When we speak of the 5,440 evacuees, or even 14 centers, the human weight of the disaster can get lost in the spreadsheets. But survival is not a number. It is the sound of modular tents being unfolded on a concrete floor. It is the sight of the Tiktay Elementary School yard in Barangay Tagay, where classrooms designed for lessons have been converted into family rooms for those who have lost their horizon. In Kamalig alone, 8,000 households now live within the direct trajectory of the threats we've analyzed. For these families, the anatomy of chaos isn't an academic study. It's a logistical nightmare. They didn't leave because they wanted to. They left because the mountain gave them no choice. But here lies the true conflict of the Mayon crisis, the struggle between physical safety and economic survival. As we mentioned earlier, many of these residents were entering the danger zone as late as last week. They weren't being reckless. They were feeding the pigs and chickens that represent their entire household income. To leave the mountain is to leave their bank accounts behind. Survival isn't just about leaving a dangerous place. It's about what you are forced to leave behind. In the schoolyards of Albay, the atmosphere is one of the calm in the storm. Under the directive of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the response has been a whole-of-government effort. The tents were waiting. The aid is moving. This is the positive side of the prepper mindset on a national scale. The Philippines has learned from centuries of fire, and that knowledge is what is keeping the casualty count at 0 today. But even the best prepared system has its limits. While the families unfold their tents, the infrastructure that connects them to the rest of the world is beginning to buckle under the weight of the ash and the coming rain. The roads are disappearing. The skies are closing. And the agency in charge of the alert level is refusing to back down. To understand why this unresolved status is the most dangerous phase of all, we have to look at the systems that are now reaching their breaking point. The mountain is shedding. The people are waiting. But the grid is starting to fail. When a volcano sheds its weight, it doesn't just bury land, it clogs the arteries of a nation. To understand the true scale of the Mayon crisis, we have to look past the gullies and toward the Maharlika Highway. This is the primary logistical lifeline of southern Luzon. On Saturday afternoon, visibility here dropped so low that motorists were forced to use headlights at midday, crawling through a gray haze of abrasive volcanic glass. The Department of Public Works and Highways has begun manual clearing operations, but they are fighting a losing battle against the wind. In investigative meteorology, we call this infrastructure paralysis. The paralysis extends to the skies. The Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, CAAP, suspended all Bicol-bound flights early Sunday. At least 2 Cebu Pacific flights were canceled immediately, leaving more than 230 passengers with no choice but to be rerouted by overland bus. They are now traveling hundreds of miles through the very ash that grounded their planes. This is the cascading cost of a silent collapse. It is a ripple effect that turns a geological event into a national transport crisis. But perhaps the most telling sign of the system's pressure is the Alert Level 3. We are currently in a state of suspended animation. The agency has not announced an end to the eruption, nor have they signaled a slowdown. This is the gray zone of disaster management. Nothing is escalating officially, but nothing is improving either. The status is held. In this plateau of uncertainty, the resources are being stretched to their limits. The emergency teams are tired, the evacuees are anxious, and the infrastructure is grit-blasted and failing. Nothing is escalating officially, but nothing is improving either. We are now 117 days into this siege. The lava is still feeding the Miisi Gully. The slopes are still loaded with 700-degree debris. And the rain, the catalyst we've been tracking, is no longer a forecast. It is a reality. As the schoolyards of Kamalig fill with families unfolding their tents, the system is holding its breath. Because we are left with one final haunting question. Is what we've seen in the last 24 hours the climax of the story? Or is it merely the prologue to something much worse? We are entering the final chapter, the unresolved ending. We have reached the end of our debrief, but for the people of Albay, the story is far from over. Maria Antonia Bornas confirmed that as of this hour, there has been no significant change in Mayon's monitoring parameters since the Saturday collapse. In the language of geophysics, that is a warning. It means the conditions that produced 14 pyroclastic density currents in a single day are exactly the same conditions present today. The system hasn't reset. It hasn't stabilized. It is simply reloading. The question is no longer whether Mayon will collapse again. It already has, repeatedly. The question is no longer whether the danger zone will be breached. It already has been. The real question is whether the Lahar advisory, the one almost no foreign coverage is mentioning, becomes the next bulletin to escalate. We are looking at a mountain that is not exploding, but shedding. A mountain that is effectively making retroactive evacuations, reclaiming the land by force. Yesterday wasn't the peak of this crisis. In the new reality of atmospheric anomalies and systemic failures, yesterday was merely the baseline. As we look toward the next 24 hours, the data remains chillingly consistent. The lava is still feeding. The slopes are still loaded with 700-degree debris. The rain is still in the forecast. And inside the schoolyards of Kamalig, the families that arrived this morning are unfolding the tents that were waiting for them. They are ready. The question is, are we? This has been a PlasmaPulse strategic debrief. We will continue to monitor the sensors and the skies. If the parameters shift, you will be the first to know. Stay informed, stay prepared, and most importantly, stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next debrief.